Here we go. Well, it's good to have another time to get together and discuss the work of an evangelist. We've got a different broadcast in some ways today that we've got Luke Chandler joining Terry and I. We're going to be taking some time to walk through one of the maybe more rare opportunities that exist for folks just because of cost, time, and setting, but they can have a really powerful impact upon an evangelist, a Bible student, a teacher, to kind of take the framework of the scriptures and the framework of God's story and build out all the flesh that surrounds those bones. And so, how are you doing today, Luke? It's good for you to join us and having a good day so far?
Great day so far, and thanks for the invitation to be on. It's a beautiful day here in Florida, but it's a little too warm for my taste. You all have some cooler temperatures up north, which I'm envious of. But so it goes. Maybe you feel the opposite.
It's not exactly what you would think. Right now, at least in Georgia, it's basically been kind of warm and wet. And I know Terry just finally found that he had power again, so it's not
Well,
our
that is a blessing.
typical
Yeah,
temperature structures.
yeah, we're way
Um,
above average on heat and way above average on rainfall for the winter. So this is actually feels more like what Tampa normally feels like in the winter. I'm afraid. So I'm
I'm
not a
so
fan of
sorry.
it.
A couple of quick things. Just know that we'll probably have some folks hop in with questions. We'll try to, if you're joining us, go ahead and ask your questions. We're going to bring them up and talk to them. I'll read them to Luke because Luke may or may not be able to see those. Um, Luke, why don't you share a little bit before we get deeper into our three core ideas about your background and experience that you're bringing to the table as regards to a tour leader, a student, an educator. Just tell us a little bit about yourself in that area.
Okay, well, I was a history major in college anyway, with a focus in ancient history of my undergrad. I made my very first trip to Israel back in the year 2000 with Farrell Jenkins, part of a group, and blew my mind, blew me away, like it does a lot of people. And I came back wanting to go again, and it had a huge impact on the way I looked at the Bible, read the Bible, taught the Bible. In 2009, I had an opportunity sort of land in my lap to go participate in an archaeological dig overlooking the valley where David and Goliath fought, as it happened to be. And so I talked my wife let me go once, and I said, well, I'll try it once. And I went back the next 7 consecutive years as well. And I took a couple of years off, went back this past summer too. And during that time, I began leading tours as well. I've gotten my master's degree in ancient history, which has been a big help as well. Just resources, filling in blanks and getting context. And I've been, I think my 15th trip to Israel is coming up in a little while, in May, and we're about to close the group. We have room for a few more people still, but it's just totally changed the way I see the Bible, I read the Bible, and the times of the Bible. And it's just had a tremendous, profound impact on me. And the archaeological work, not everyone's up to that, and that's fine. I'm not always feeling up to that either. But it's given me some new tools, some new resources, and it helps bring things closer in perspective in a lot of ways, I think.
Yeah, I know that we have talked. You and I have talked about our shared experiences in Israel. Mine's a little more recent, obviously, and how that has kind of changed a little bit of our perspective of the Bible story at times. And I know that your continued trips there are certainly kind of reinforced some of those things. And that's kind of set the framework for our core questions for the day. We probably will address a few other ones along the route or the journey we take. But if you could synthesize or simplify some of the best points in regards to helping a preacher, a teacher, a Bible student, how does Israel accomplish that? How does the ancient Near East trips, as a maybe even a larger basket, help in that area?
Well, I think one of the first things that I've realized is that any preacher, any teacher of the Bible, we can only teach within the limits of within our own limits of understanding and experience. And that's one reason why I think it's vital for Bible teachers, preachers, to do what we call continuing education. We get commentaries, we listen to other teachers that we respect who have different perspectives. and because it broadens our experience. It broadens our perspectives, and we can only teach within our own personal limits of understanding. And a trip over there, and an informed trip where we can see places and see how things fit together, it broadens our own experience. It expands our own understanding, and that passes on to every single person we teach. If my knowledge comes only from books or videos or articles, that's fine. But it's very different when we have a personal experience to add to it. I like to think of it like if we're into Renaissance art, for example, or art. Imagine a class on art being taught by someone who's read a lot of books and looked at a lot of pictures and seen things on a screen. But imagine that same class taught by someone who's gone over there and had master classes on site, seeing these great works firsthand and learning from people who can explain on site how things are made, what they mean. It would be a totally different class because one teacher has had the ability to expand their understanding beyond just what you see with your eyes. You have it with your senses, and you're learning on site, and it imprints on your memory very differently and far more deeply. And so any teacher or preacher of the Bible that's able to gain that perspective, that understanding firsthand there, it helps our memory, it connects things, and it broadens our horizons, like anything like that would. And we pass that on to everyone we teach. The entire congregation benefits in some way from if the teacher has been able to go there and experience it personally.
Yeah, I know for me, and this is kind of a way to describe it, is the difference between two-dimensional and three-dimensional. Most folks, when they talk about the Temple Mount area, are familiar with a number of the iconic photographs, these key sites where the sun is just right, you're at the golden hour, you get the reflection off the dome, you kind of see that layout, but then you're ending up with this two-dimensional picture that doesn't give you depth of field, it doesn't give you kind of the rest of the pictorial context. And the minute you step into, there's a parking lot that exists above one of the larger chunks of a predominantly Jewish grave zone. And so there's, rows and rows of, rock crypts that are all stacked there. And to your right is the Garden of Gethsemane zone where you've got Christian burial sites. And then in front of you across the freeway and going up to the edges of the Temple Mount, you've got graves that are predominantly Muslim. None of those things are really seen in the photos because you're going to crop them out. They're not really the thing that you're really wanting to emphasize. You want to emphasize the picture of the Temple Mount area. You want to see the picture of the mosque that's there presently, which is a beautiful replica of a Byzantine era church model to a certain degree, but is more known now as a mosque. But you don't see that basically the temple zone is surrounded by dead men's bones, like as it is in the current context. I mean, it really is. And we don't see that in the picture, and you can't connect that in the picture. And I can describe it and maybe do a really good job of making you feel like, oh, I'm there. But from a standpoint of you going and teaching a third person that's a really hard, logical and emotional and conceptual jump to make, to go from I read it, I've seen it, to now I've walked it. And you can walk that route too. It's one of the common walking routes that people take to kind of see those key spots, is to go from one graveyard to another graveyard to the garden to the temple zone.
And the view you're describing, I'm sorry.
No.
The view you're describing, it's the view from the Mount of Olives, and it's the very same view Jesus had when he's describing in Matthew, to his disciples. They're looking at the buildings of the temple, and he says, "I'll tell you, the day is coming, not one stone will be left upon another." And that's the same view he had, and so it connects us to that story. We're now able to see through his eyes the next time we read or teach that. And the path you walk down past, those Jewish cemeteries and then into the Kidron Valley there, that's the same path as in ancient times. Yeah. And, the best place to put a road today is usually the best place they put a road, 2,000 or 3,000 or 4,000 years ago. And that path just follows the land, follows the Mount of Olives. And they just paved the path people had used for thousands of years. And that takes us back to David as well. Because when David was escaping Absalom, he fled Jerusalem, and his Jerusalem, if you're looking up there, would be a little bit to the left of the Temple Mount, the south. But it says he went up the Mount of Olives on his way out, and it would be like that very same path that you're walking. And so Jesus, when he comes in, he's going down to Jerusalem. Each day is last week. He's taken that path down to go into the city and the Temple Mount to teach in his last week. It's the same path David took to flee Jerusalem in the time of Absalom, in that threat. And we can make connections like that and maybe get lessons from that as well.
Yeah. Bob's talking about the proximity of things. I'll get you in a second, Terry, but everything is kind of compact or compressed when you're talking about the city of David, and we're talking about Jerusalem, we're talking about the Mount area, and then the wards of Jerusalem broadly. But yeah, there's some good value there too, Terry.
Yeah, so I'm the lone guy that's not been. Bucket list item. Hopefully that will happen when some other things calm down. But I have this question as the guy that's not been, and it's kind of a two-part question maybe for both of you to answer because you both have been, and I know Phil, it was not so long ago since you were over there. Maybe share with us the one thing that when you saw it in person was just maybe awe-inspiring or changed maybe how you viewed something the most. And then secondly, what have you seen? And I know for Luke, it's going to be hard to pick one thing for both of these, but what have you seen that maybe has helped your teaching the most in that? And that doesn't mean they're the same thing, by the way. So we'll start with Phil while Luke has to pare down his answers, I guess.
So you got, I've kind of narrowed it down to a couple of things, but I'll give you one of the ones that was breathtaking. For me, it's being on the Sea of Galilee, like Tiberias, Caesarea, however you're going to look at it. But to be there and to read from some of the texts that refer to events that happened there, a lot of Israel is in the category historically, maybe here or near here, where you're not exactly sure the location. Not everything, but a big chunk of it is kind of like a bubble exists around a possible site, and this is maybe the good spot for it. But when you're out on the sea, you know that that's that. And it's not so big that you can't see the edges, because you can be in the middle and you can see the coast on a clear day. And so it's not so huge that you're not going to be like, okay, I'm not in the right spot. And so for me, at least on one level, sunrise there and then getting out on the boat, modern boat, yes, all that. And then, reading the text of those events was really connected, tied together, a great, this is now more real than it's been on some levels. I think there's great value to the testimony of Jesus when he's talking about blessed are those who believe without seeing. I think that's a different level than what I'm talking about. I'm talking about as a student, as a believer and a disciple. There's a great connection there. Transformative in the sense of the way that I teach. That's a more complex thing, because on one level, I'm still, even though it's quite a few months removed from when we returned, I'm still processing the intricacies of the interconnected nature of the ground, the people, and the story. And so on a daily basis now, when I read the text, I have to stop and think, was I there? Is this one of the spots where I was at? Let me look at my notes. When I go back to my notes from our journey and look at all the places I went, because we had a lot on the trip that I took, we packed as much as we possibly could into the agenda. And so that meant we weren't at each site for a long time, but we really got to spend time getting to the main big sites and some sites that were maybe less prioritized by me for other reasons. And so it's kind of seeing that spider web of connections. Okay, if I was there, what do I remember from there? Okay, what are the pictures I took? What are my notes? What did I see when I was there? And so there's a little bit of that goes on. And now, from time to time, I get to say in Bible classes, when I was there, I saw this. Let me explain it to you.
Is that a humble brag, by the way? Is that what that's classified as, maybe?
I think that's the cultural aspect of it, but generally I do that when there's a reason, because I want to talk about the physicality of a space. I want to talk about how the theology impacts the the land, and sometimes that's the case. And so those are at least the shorter of what would probably be really long answers for both those questions. Luke?
For me, it's hard. One thing I try to do every trip I make is to include something new that I haven't seen before, because there is always more to see, and there is so much over there. And Israel's a very small country. Just for perspective, you could take the entire modern state of Israel, turn it sideways, and fit it inside Alabama, side to side. And like the bottom half of that almost is desert, where there's not much to see and few people are. We're almost entirely in the northern half of Israel when we go on a tour or a trip there. But I'd say two places come to mind as far as just places that really mean a lot to me and are transformative. One was the Sea of Galilee. The very first time people see the Sea of Galilee, it's meaningful because the Old Testament pretty much ignores the Sea of Galilee. And it's, there are a lot of Gentiles up there in that time. In the New Testament, there's still a lot of Gentiles, but there's a stronger Jewish presence in the New Testament, and that's where Jesus was, of course, especially the top half of the Sea of Galilee, along the northern western coasts and a little on the eastern coast. But when you see that area and you see how compact, how small it is, and how many stories and events from Jesus' ministry happen in one view, it blows your mind. On the Sea of Galilee, it's a lake. It's not even a really big lake compared to some. But we think of it with the word sea in English. I think it's a translation tweak in the Latin somewhere. Someone used a bigger word, and it's really the Lake of Galilee. But it's such a small space, and yet so much happened there. And it's still largely undeveloped on the coastlines. So you can sit there and visually picture how it looked. In fact, it was probably more developed in terms of urban settlements. It was more so on the coastlines in the time of Jesus. It's a little more rural now on most of the coastlines. But you can easily visualize Jesus' ministry and him going from place to place. And it really makes an impact and brings so many of the gospel stories to life. Another place that touches me that still blows me away is in Jerusalem. If you go into what's called the City of David Park, it's where they have what they believe was David's palace and what you do to get into Hezekiah's tunnel and a lot of other things. There's an overlook there, and you can stand up top. It's a little platform, but you can see so much of Jerusalem's history right there. You're standing below the Temple Mount, which still, elevation-wise, towers above you because it is a mountain that the temple was on. You can look to the south and see where Abraham came up to sacrifice Isaac on the Temple Mount. The whole story of Isaac's binding and sacrifice, you're standing there looking over the city of David. You get the same rooftop perspective he had in the story of Bathsheba when he saw her. You can see where the Gihon spring was, the water supply, where Solomon was coronated. You can see in the distance where Adonijah, David's son, oldest surviving son, who tried to steal the throne before Solomon was crowned. You can see where he was having a secret banquet. And you can see that whole story. You can see where David went out and went up the Mount of Olives. And you can, of course, see Jesus. And you see so much of Jesus' history, of the history of the story of redemption. From Abraham and Isaac to David to the other kings to Jesus in his last week in the Mount of Olives. It's all right there, and it's all in the same space, and it's all connected together. And that's still, I try to hit my groups up there when we do a tour. And just go through some of that because you're looking at it and it connects it all. We talk about how the Bible's all connected, the story of redemption, and you can see so many chapters of it in that one spot and just put it all together. And it imprints itself in your mind. You're taking it in with your senses, and it's more memorable. The details are far more vivid, and you see it in 3 dimensions, as you mentioned, Phil. And teaching, we can connect those things and lessons. If we ever do a story of the plan of salvation, God's plan to save people, that's a great way to connect it all. And one thing I'll mention on that with the Sea of Galilee, with Jesus' ministry, it's another thing I think, it segues to another area, another way it helps preachers and teachers. Jesus liked parables. And what Jesus did was take common everyday images, planting a field, doing business, fishing, and he attached a spiritual meaning to that everyday image. And the land itself is full of parables. And one I like is the Sea of Galilee. Because when we go there, it's really a great metaphor for the gospel. Because in the time of Jesus, Jews were primarily inhabiting the northern and western coasts. But on the eastern side, it was primarily Gentiles. And Jesus fed the 5,000 somewhere on the northern coast, and that was a Jewish feeding. But we go to the eastern side where he fed the 4,000, and that was a primarily Gentile area. That's where there are swine being kept. He cast the demons into swine. That's a Gentile area. Jews don't keep pigs. And he fed the 4,000. That was primarily a Gentile group. And in the Gospel of Mark, Jesus is constantly going back and forth from the Jewish side to the Gentile side. At one time, his disciples ask him, why. Jesus is explaining. He gives bread, to the Jews, and he asked his disciples, how many baskets do I have left over? 12. And when I fed the 4,000, how many? 7. I think I'm getting those numbers, not switching them around there. But, symbolically, we can see Jesus as the bridge in Mark, especially, which has him going back and forth. He's crossing between the Jews and the Gentiles, teaching both groups. And he's the bread of life to both groups. And you look at the Sea of Galilee, isn't that a metaphor for the gospel? We had this divide between the Jews and everyone else, the Gentiles. And yet we see Jesus bridging that gap, crossing back and forth, being the bread of life to both of them. And if you look at symbolic numbers for the baskets left over, 12 baskets, people of God, and 7 baskets of food left over, the number of completion, the complete people of God, we see a parable just from the land. And in this case, the Sea of Galilee. We see a parable of the entire gospel played out in the Sea of Galilee itself. And there's so many of those. If we get to know the land, we see how we can draw spiritual lessons and spiritual metaphors from the physical places. And that adds a new dimension to our understanding and to our teaching. And it brings us closer to the way the original audience would have seen it. The original audiences for the Bible, for the most part, personally knew the land. There are places they know. And we're restorationists. We like original meanings, original perspective, original understanding. When we go there and we see these things, it brings us closer to the original audience, to the way they saw and read these things. And it brings us closer to the original, which is philosophically what we like to do anyway.
Yeah, there's great value. Oh, go ahead, Terry.
Yeah, I want to follow up on that. That's a great point. But let me say this. So there are a lot of things over there. For instance, the tomb of Jesus, where there's a lot of speculation and questions about those kind of things. And I remember watching one of the Appian media deals that was showing a location, and I forget which it was. I don't think it was the tomb of Jesus. I think it was something else. I think it was maybe about the manger, because it was talking about the birth of Jesus, and this is kind of a spot that's viewed as that possibility. How would you answer the skeptic? And I because I think we are restorationists, but we're also, if we're not careful, I'm going to use this term, we have a tendency to be curmudgeons as well, and very critical about things. And so to the person who may try to be a little critical of that, which I've heard by some people, well, we don't know that for sure. I think there's still merit to that, even though I've not been there. Even if that's not, for instance, the tomb, the specific tomb, there's still a lot to be learned, because we know this tomb is from that time period. And I've not been there and see those kind of things. With you having dealt with that, even the archaeological history and background you have, Luke, just a brief answer to maybe that skeptic who might criticize some of these things as to how these are still beneficial to see.
I'll confess, by training, history and archaeology, I'm trained to make a distinction between what seems solid and what is not. Curmudgeon, I hope I'm not that. But
Yeah.
I know what you mean, though. I know what you mean. In some cases, it's wise to put that caveat there, because especially with archaeology, there's a big history of people promoting what are false finds or not real, and it gets us in trouble because it gives us a reputation of just not being careful and just believing whatever we want to believe, regardless of the facts. And we make that charge against people who believe in the evolutionary end of things. They're not paying careful attention to what actually is a fact and what's speculation. and we go the other way and make ourselves, in other people's eyes, look foolish because we jump onto things that just are not true. But even with things like the tomb of Jesus, there's the garden tomb, which just honestly definitely is not the tomb. It's not the right period of time. But one thing it does do is it gives us an image. It helps connect us to the story. The garden tomb feels like we want it to. And even if it's not for sure the place, sometimes it gives us, it helps connect us to the story emotionally. And while we need to be careful and hedge that with, just not, with truth as well, it gives us images that help us see the Bible more clearly. And from a teaching perspective, they're good teaching tools because it helps others get an image, helps them to visualize something that previously has just been words on a page. But now we can put a visual, and we put it in our mind, in our heart, with a different sense, with one of our other senses now. And so I think it's important to just put the caveat, we don't know for sure, because people tend to want certainty, and we just don't have that all the time. And but rightly dividing, the sights and the finds. But I think there is benefit from just if this is not the actual place, it was close to here, and it looks something like this, and that gives us benefit, I think.
Yeah,
Well,
that's a great answer.
When you go over there, one of the first things you get to see a lot of is the lasagna of history, where layer upon layer is scraped off. They put another layer on, they scrape that off, they put another layer on, and you get this kind of stacked antiquity at almost every historical site. And so immediately you know that things are going to be jumbled in each of those layers, and maybe not in the same spot, but then maybe not even the right place to begin with, but you're already knowing that's the case. And so, like we're talking about the tomb, the garden tomb looks like the tomb, but
Right.
it's the wrong spot, wrong era. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre doesn't look anything like it should. But Luke and I have talked about this. It's probably more likely than not the best location, maybe even the right location. But if you go there, you're not going to see the emotive side of the visual, but you're going to know how close it was from the Temple Mount area. You're going to see it in the context of its proximity to all the rest of many of the specifically important contextual sites from Second Temple Israel around the time of Christ, and you're going to see all of those things in the connectors of the gospel story and then the kingdom story. Those two stories that you get in the first part of the New Testament, and so they're gonna have those benefits of having been there. And yeah, you kind of get worn out on a quick trip of here's another Byzantine church. It looks a lot like the other Byzantine church, and it's got a whole lot of Byzantine art. But there's a thing that we do of history where we believe that because we know more than they did then, and we devalue their ability to identify a site because we're smarter than they are, which none of that is actually true. Were there charlatans? Surely. There are people selling sites as being the authentic sites. But we can then evaluate their evidence and make a good answer, a good decision, and say there's still value. The upper room site, there's still value in it, even though its authenticity being the upper room, or being near there, but it gives us some idea. It also helps us understand believers who were in these middle centuries between Jesus and us. How did they respond to the Bible stories? What were they motivated to do? Why did they do these things? How does that impact my faith and understanding? So from the curmudgeon side, the critic side, the skeptic side, there's value in the response to the story of the scriptures that moved men to believe and to obey, just like it moves you and I to believe and obey. What they do and why. And so I think there's some good value there that kind of exists in the middle space as well.
Yeah, and for not having been over there, I know one of the things, and this may seem silly, that I really want to see is just understanding the terrain and the geography and how that impacts even some of the more simple things. One of those that sticks out to my mind is in Matthew 23 when Jesus brings up the idea of the whitewashed tombs. And, we know that reference and what that's dealing with. I think it's hard for us to imagine, but have you, you were mentioning earlier the tombs around the temple and so forth, and the bones and all those things, that if you were able to be there and imagine those whitewashed tombs against the geography and landscape, you would see how bright they would stand out. And that passage, something so simple, would become more alive than it could ever become for me, having not been there. Even knowing the somewhat two-dimensional academic side of that, I could see how the value of even something that simple would really bring a lot more understanding and emotion. And I think sometimes we downplay the emotion of that connection, but that's a very important thing. And I just, like I said, I look forward to the day when I get to go. That is certainly a plan um, of mine, for the reasons you all are talking about, to make those connections that I don't have at this point.
Right. Like structurally, all the ancient Near East area and the modern context, nobody paints anything for the most part because it gets sandblasted constantly. And so everything's brown, tan, earth tones.
Right.
Even concrete kind of takes on a different color. It's not exactly the same color as American concrete. So you do have the metal structures, the modern structures, but colors are different. And so, yeah, there's a lot of variation there. And the geography and topography feels like a lot of the wine country of California. And so there's some similarities there. Different structure, different, plants and stuff, but it's similar. Luke, I know you've got probably some extra stuff there too.
Now, you mentioned earlier the what motivated people of faith. I wanted to come back to that. Motivated people to believe and to obey or to act on their faith. Another benefit that I see, besides the things we've talked about of a visit there, visuals and getting closer to the original understanding, is that I think it humanizes what I call Bible superheroes. I think it's easy sometimes to read stories of the Bible and see, David or Gideon or Abraham or Paul, and we see them as people who are beyond our level in some way. We read them, we admire them, we understand them perhaps, we see their weaknesses, but we see what they do, and it is just, they're spiritual superheroes, and we don't really relate to them. They inspire us, but we see we are not really like those people. And yet when you go there and you put these connections together, one thing we see is that they did make decisions in the same kinds of ways we make decisions. And they're not really superheroes in that sense. I think it makes the stories and the people more relatable to go there and see that they were ordinary people. They went out and did what they did, but they came home to their house each night, and here's what their house would have looked like. There are places you can go to get an idea of what a home looked like, whether in the time of Jesus or in the time of David or Abraham. And their homes, they have kitchens. They have, a pantry, which is where they had all their pottery with their food stored. And we find sometimes pantries that have been, I found one time a pantry, a jar of peas, a jar of lentils, a jar of grain. They've all been burned and preserved in the destruction of a city. But that was someone's kitchen. And Gideon and his family, they had a kitchen. Wherever Jesus stayed, they had a kitchen, and they had bedrooms, and they had, doors, and it really brings them down to earth. And that's good for us because we're down to earth. And I think it makes their example more powerful, more relatable for us. David and Goliath is a great one. I spent 5 years in a row excavating on a hill in a town overlooking the battlefield. And, you sit there and take a break and you sit there and imagine the story and try to visualize the armies and where they would have been. But one thing, the city we were digging was from around that time period, the time of David, basically. And you find tools, you find kitchens, you find things for making pita bread. They had little things, you make pita, they had pita bread, so they could have their pocket bread when they're taking a break from the battle. When they come in for their battle lines, David's brought some cheese and things for his brothers and the commander, and they can sit there and, munch on pita bread, and eat their lunch. But it's very down to earth. When David goes out there and takes on Goliath, we found sling stones. And military-grade sling stones are like a stone tennis ball. They're worked to be very smooth, about the size of a tennis ball, more or less. But on a caliber scale, if you measure by caliber, how big is a tennis ball? Imagine that hitting your body at 70 miles an hour. It's not a kid's weapon. We think of David, a little pebble from the brook, and little boy David, but he was probably tough enough, and he would have gotten a stone that could do some damage, a stone from the brook, but a smooth stone that would be balanced enough. And it hit Goliath in the head. It sunk him. But slingers were standard military groups. The Bible makes references to military formations of slingers, and they're ancient snipers. And you think about it, why did David use a stone? Well, that's what he had. But as a shepherd, you learn to use a range weapon. If you're taking on a bear or a lion, you hit him from a distance, then you close in for the kill. Take the lamb out of the mouth, as he describes to Saul. Goliath is equipped with what looks like Greek armor, and it shows a hint of the Philistines' Greek origins. They were immigrants from Greek islands and other places. And the idea of a champion and a champion from each side fighting, that's a Greek war. That's from like the Battle of Troy, the Iliad, Achilles and Hector, or something like that. And they bring that way of fighting, and Goliath has Greek armor with a super long thrusting spear, and David, how do you take that out? Well, you use a range weapon, and that just happens to be his expertise. So it brings it down to earth. I mean, he was skilled with ranged weapons, but it's, you stay away from his long spear, you hit him from afar, you take him down, then you go in and finish him off. That's how you defeat someone like that with a ranged weapon. And it's very practical. And David didn't, he had great faith, but he did everything he could do, his training, his preparation. How many people were prepared in ranged weapons as he was? Not too many. Some, but he happened to have the faith to go with his skills, and it makes him in that story a little more relatable for us, and it shows a bit of his thinking process. And he didn't just say, "Well, here's a stone, I'll just wing it." We don't necessarily think that. I'm exaggerating, but it takes these people and it humanizes them. And rather than looking at them as something like Superman or Batman, who have these skills or abilities beyond ours, they're people just like us who happen to make decisions in a real place with real physical objects that we can find. And it shows them they're like us, and that we can do the kinds of things they did and show the kind of faith they did, because it's very down to earth. They're just ordinary people who, like us, make real life decisions in real places with what they have around them. And that's key to bridging that gap of space and time that we bring when we read the Bible and teach it.
If one of the expectations for a teacher of the scriptures is to give a sense to the reading, then you need to begin to pull from all the possible set of tools that are before you. And you can understand the literary setting of a story. You can understand the doctrinal imperatives and the theology side. But to be able to add a couple more layers, to put some shrubbery, to put a couple trees in a literary sense in your teaching, then gives you the ability to really bring it home in a sense of this is something how we can do it now. It gives you that one more layer, and really, good exposition of the text accomplishes that. It brings the person into the story and lets them see it from the inside rather than the outside. And so going there gives you at least that additional set of opportunities. One of the questions that I encountered a lot, and I know Luke gets this a lot, is the safety on a trip like this. Because for very good reasons, people are concerned about their safety. Let's talk about that just briefly. It changes. That comment has changed over the years, and I can comment to my individual trip. You can comment to your 14 or 15 trips, and safety is always a concern. But what's a good way to think through that question?
That is a question I've just even recently gotten again. And we get that question because all we typically hear of Israel these days is on the news. And what makes the news in Israel? What do you report on? Like anything, you report on the sensational. That's what the media does. They report on unusual things that are sensational, that get viewers, and that and there's the Israeli-Palestinian issue on whose land it is, and occasionally it spills over into violence. I like to think of it very much as, well, actually, I think it's very exactly like places. If we live near or in a principal city here, Tampa, Chicago, Memphis, Birmingham, Washington, D.C., New York, San Francisco, etc. Some of these cities have very violent reputations. How often do we see on the news how many people were shot in Chicago this past weekend, for example. And it's in Baltimore, D.C., there are places they're dangerous neighborhoods, and yet we go to these places. Christians live in these places, and they feel as safe there as anywhere because the violence, the problems, the danger is only in certain spots. If you avoid those spots, you're as safe as you can be anywhere, whether Chicago or San Francisco or whatever. And Israel is the very same way. If we look on a map at where they have troubles, they're typically in the very same areas. Gaza Strip, certain parts of East Jerusalem, and certain places in the West Bank. Don't go to those areas, and we're as safe as we are anywhere. It's just like being at home. I've spent over 8 months of my life in Israel to date, and I've never felt in danger because I don't go to dangerous areas. And if we go on a tour, by law you have to have a licensed local guide, and they take you around. Those tour guides have families. They don't want to be in danger. They do this every day. They have no interest in being in dangerous areas because they don't want to put themselves in safety. And if they do, or in danger, and put themselves in jeopardy, or their groups. And if they do, of course, that's not only the risk, but if they get a reputation for that, that's their livelihood. They stay in safe areas. And if we're in safe areas in Israel, which is most of the country, we're as safe there as we can be anywhere. Statistically, Israel, get away from Gaza Strip and places like that, statistically, Israel is safer than most American cities. Last year, if you add up all those who were harmed in any way with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, how many tourists are in that number? The answer is likely zero. And if there are any tourists in that, it's because they chose to go into a dangerous area. And there are a handful that just ignore risks, go off by themselves on their own. And but if you go with a group led by someone responsible and aware, you don't go to those areas, and you're as safe or safer than you would be anywhere. You really are. We don't trust the news media in a lot of ways, and yet we tend to believe it anyway. The news media portrays Israel as a certain way, and that's not the reality on the ground. It's a safe place, and if you don't go to certain areas, you're fine. Israel's having record tourism. 4 million people visited Israel last year, and none were victims of any of those Israeli-Palestinian issues, because you stay away from those areas and you're fine.
And you can really kind of see those conflict zones. They're very obvious. You have to pass through the border sections to go to different sites at times.
Checkpoints.
And the checkpoints are kind of annoying, but for the most part, they're pretty efficient about it. It's not that big of a deal. But you can really tell that, hey, look, this is a huge part of their economy. And so they know that the money matters to their communities. And whether you're in the Palestinian side or you're in the Israeli side of the two sections of that area, if you're an American with, as they see it, money, because you're there, you have money, your really only safety issues is getting swindled. And when they're selling you something that's not worth what they say it is. If you're really talking about when it comes down to it. We went to one of the shops in Israel, and one of the clerks there is interacting with the various folks, and he starts pulling out a pretty solid Southern accent in English and talking to me. And I said, no, wait a minute. I was like, that's not your normal accent. He's like, no, we're trained and encouraged to make Americans and travelers from other countries to feel comfortable. And so I'm using an accent that sounds kind of like yours. And I said, okay, well, I guess I know what I sound like now. But that's their whole goal is they want you to come back. They want you to tell your friends that it was a good, safe trip. And they will make every single aspect of that accomplish that goal. The whole entire industry will. And so that's kind of part of their intention from a tourism base as the country deals with all of these various political and social issues, just like ours do. And again, really the only issues I had personally there was annoying people trying to sell me stuff I didn't want or didn't need. So it's just basically like any other mall in the United States. So I didn't really see any significant personal safety issues, and would go back again if this, all the other issues are off the table: cost, schedule, Safety is just not an issue in the issues. Drinking plenty of water, always a need. Good food choices, always a need. But safety, I just don't feel like that's a valid concern in the status quo as things are right now. Because what Israel wants is you to bring your tourism with you to there. So one of the questions we had very specifically is roughly how much does it cost to go on a trip like the one that you are doing in May? Um, uh, Let me just say this, Luke leads tours. He can talk about his tours all he wants. That's one of the things he does. That's just fine. So look, there's no limitation on, you can talk about it here. It's okay.
This is a safe space.
Safe space.
Oh, okay.
It's a
Speaking
safe
of
space.
safety, the tour I do right now, it's a 13-day tour. It departs the U.S. on a Monday and arrives back in the U.S. the following week, Saturday. It's longer than most tours. Most tours are 10 to 12 days. My 13-day tour, we can get more in. And I'm a preacher, so I plan to be gone just one Sunday. I design it that way intentionally. But while you're there, why not add a day or two longer than most tours? Because you're already there, and you're never going to see everything. But if you're there an extra day or two, you get to see more. And if that's your only time going, then you get those extra things in. My tour for this year costs $4,395. That's actually less expensive than most tours that are shorter, like 11 or 12-day tours. Most of them are more than my 13-day tour. But it's that price includes the round-trip airfare from the United States. It includes 2 meals a day, breakfast and dinner every day, and they're buffets. There's in good hotel buffets. It's food you recognize, food that's good. Everyone can find what they like. It includes everything. The only thing that doesn't include is lunch each day, which I say plan $15 a day for that, but it's usually less. Sometimes it's a lot less, but it's good food. It's healthy food. And that includes the gratuities and everything. So a lot of tours, a typical tour, it's the $4,000 to $5,000 range typically. The shorter tours, you might get closer to $4,000 usually, and maybe in the off season, go under that. If you go this time of year, you can get a tour for less. However, the days are shorter, so you don't have much daylight for photos, and you have a lot of rain. Right now, Israel's having record rains. And so that affects your experience too, rain. Winter's the rainy season. The dry season really begins by April. It's dry season typically, and the days are getting longer. So April through early October, that's a great range. It's a little more. It's cheaper in those other months, but it also affects your experience. So anyway, mine's a 13-day trip, $43.95. It's actually a very good value for the length and for what you get. We see a lot of things, and we have a licensed tour guide who's been doing it for more than 25 years. He actually has a master's degree in archaeology. Our tour guide does from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. Most tour guides have the equivalent of like an AA. You have to go through a course over there, a pretty rigorous course, but not all. There are different levels, and not all tour guides have the same experience. I've heard tour guides say things that are just wrong. Because they don't know and they make something up, or they say things the group wants to hear, and why would we want incorrect information? Truth is always a good thing, and so I have an experienced guide. I have my own experiences and training to bring to the table, and so that's my trip, and I think it's as good or better than any trip you can get out there. It's been taken out around. It's been hashed out taking it a lot of times and refining it and going to places that are relevant. You mentioned Byzantine churches, Phil. I try not to go to any more than I have to on that. The Byzantines do help us identify a lot of sites, but we don't go there to see a Catholic-looking chapel. It's hard to visualize. I prefer authentic places over speculative places, as much as I can reasonably anyway. But also images, and I think it's a very good trip, and it's been an experienced, tried and true trip at this point.
Well, yeah, and to put it in context, the components of the trip are the travel fare, some of the border entry exit issues. Sites all have fees at times. Some of them are basically like national parks. And so there's
Hmm.
entry fees for some of these locations. Other thing you got to remember is that at sundown, basically everything closes. For the most part, at least in early October when we were there. So in Israel, you're not seeing anything at night. So that means you're getting up early to pack in those sites too, and that requires logistics and planning. And because there's so many people there, you need to kind of coordinate those things, and so that adjusts costs. That's why your lunches cost so much, because you may have a group and you want to get your group in there in 35 minutes, not take 2 hours for lunch. Because if you spend 2 hours at lunch, that's an hour and a half. You don't get to go see the stuff you're there to see.
That's
And
a
so,
benefit. Yeah, that's a benefit of going with someone who's been before and someone who handles the logistics. I know people who have gone by themselves, have a great time, but they spend a lot of time trying to find a place.
yeah,
And sometimes they find it, sometimes they don't. But in the process, it takes longer, and so they miss other things that they could have seen. And meals, bathrooms, those are big logistical things. And if you need it or want it, you don't want to take too much time trying to find it. And meals, you can actually get very good prices if you go with a group and someone who has connections. They can
yeah,
prearrange a good lunch, and actually it's a good price, like $10, $12, and you don't have to wonder, is it healthy, is it safe, is it a
right.
good
You're paying for all
restaurant, or
those
is it
things.
something that's going to make me sick? There are
Yeah,
benefits on use of time. How much time do you have? How many times are you going to go? How do you make the best reasonable use of that?
right. And so that's part of the package of those prices. There's a lot that goes into it. Having led parts of tours, Luke's led a bunch more. You have to think through these things, and like safety always comes. Food safety is the thing. You don't want to be sick on a
Yeah.
trip. Um, you led a tour, I think it was last year, that was kind of unique in that you had the majority of Bible faculty at Florida College. Was it maybe 2 years ago
It was
with you on a
2018,
trip,
yes.
2018. On that trip, was there anything different on a trip like that than some of your other trips besides the knuckleheads that were with you? And I can say that in a fair sense.
Hey, you don't
You're
have to
speaking of
apologize to
Jared
me.
Saltz, obviously.
He
Well,
was
he's not the
one of
only
them.
knucklehead. He's
Yeah.
not the only one.
By the way, I was going to say earlier when you were talking about this shows you they're not superheroes. If you read anything Saltz has written, you already know they're not superheroes. So let's just throw that out there.
Yeah. You keep talking about salts. My wife's related to him, so I have to claim him too. Take it easy on me here. I thought this was a safe space.
It is.
But,
You can fully express your feelings about the salts in this context.
Yeah.
I don't think we have the time for that, so I'll just. Oh, Jared's a good guy. He was on that trip, and his wife, Catherine. On that trip in 2018, we did have 7 Florida College professors and several of their wives come, along with a number of other people who were not faculty. We had about 40 people that year. It was a good group. Different things. We did a couple of different sites I hadn't done before, but some of that is just every year I try to include something different or something I haven't done before. And we saw an extra synagogue that year, a place called Gamla. It's the best preserved first century synagogue in the country. Um, and so that was one new thing we did. There are several synagogues, but not many of them are from the time of Jesus. I think we hit 2 of them that trip. One's one that's kind of famous now is Magdala, but the other one, Gamla, it's a hike down there. I found out it's not something I'm going to do every year, but you can walk around that one, and there aren't restrictions like stay behind this fence like the one in Magdala. But on that year, something else we did that was different is because we had the faculty, we did an evening lecture series, just short lectures, half hour, ish. And we had each of the faculty and myself each give a presentation on something optional, in the hotel in the evening after dinner. And almost everyone came to every one of those. And one night we were privileged to get the archaeologist I work with. He's right now the head of the Department of Archaeology at Hebrew University. He came out and gave us a private presentation. That was a wonderful treat on some of his latest work. But there's something we did in 2018. I call it master classes. And that was very successful, the different professors speaking on something in their specializations or their experience. And we got to just sit at the feet of masters and have these easy, half-hour presentations. We've had a full day already. Your brain's full, so an hour or something, just you don't want that over a trip. But I've done that since. Last year, we cut it down. It was just me last year. We did, I think, 4. And for this trip coming up in May, we're doing 4 master classes. They're just extra sessions. in the evening, optional, of course. But they set up things we're going to see the next day, so we don't just show up cold and have to figure out everything about it on the spot. Supplementary information that fits our tour, and people have been very positive on those, and it's been a nice addition. I'm going to continue offering in my tours, just maybe 4 or 5 evening master classes in our hotels, just to supplement the things we get on the tour. But they're based on experiences and training, and just things that are easier to digest when you're not in the field.
Yeah, and I think that's something, one of the things that's important to see is as the process of your understanding as both a student and as a participant across the board is going to continue to improve, both on the learner side, but on the teacher side. And that's one of the things I wanted to accomplish with having Luke on today was really encourage two things. One, I want to encourage preachers to want to go for various reasons. And Terry and I both have been through this season where going seems implausible. Like, oh, it's possible I can do it, but I just can't figure out how to make it happen. But on a leadership level, I'm going to speak plainly. If you're supporting a man to preach and teach, you need to consider continuing education as part of that support, even if it's not part of his regular wages. And I'll just say it plainly, pay for your preacher to go learn. Whether that's learn to use Logos better, whether it's to go to seminars in the U.S. that might be applicable, or even pay for them to go to Israel. I'll tell you that it's not a vacation like you think. It's not lying on the beach. You are going to be active intellectually and physically for 12 to 15 hours every day. Every day starts with the wake-ups between 5:30 and 6:30, and then your brain doesn't shut off until 11 or 12 because you're going physically. Bob asked what the physical fitness endurance level is for the trip. Be in good shape, and Luke can comment about this too. Get ready to walk between 4 to 8 miles every day, and make sure you drink more water than you think you need to. And by that term, I mean I'm talking. If you're talking about those typical small Dasani Aquafina bottles, you're going to start your day with 4 of those. And so you just have 4 of those before noon. And you're going to still want to drink water afterwards because no matter when you're there, hot or cold season, you're going to be processing through a lot of water. We had people who were 85 on our trip. I was the youngest on my trip, but I also saw young children on the trip. So, if you can walk 5 or 6 miles a day, when most of it's walking type endeavors, then that's where you kind of need to think about. Luke, you want to answer Bob's question and maybe appeal if you want to.
Sure. As far as the water, yeah, ditto on that. I tell everyone bring a water bottle. The good news is they have lots of places to refill it, so you can take one bottle and just keep refilling it, and it's fine. I've never had anyone have any dehydration issues in all the times I've taken people. They're very good about that over there. It's that part of the tourist infrastructure is well developed. 48 miles a day. I don't know if we walk 4 miles or more every single day. Some days more
Because my
walking
trip
than
was
others.
also Egypt and Jordan too, and so
Okay. Because
and
some days you walk some more, but some days you don't walk nearly that much.
include
And
Petra and
I've never paced it. And of course it's not a vacation, but it's also not like boot camp. Most of the people who go statistically are over age 50. Just statistically, because you have more money, your kids are raised and out of the house, and maybe have a little more time. But I really want to encourage what Phil said: is preachers, teachers, if find a way to go. If you're in a congregation, find a way to help your preacher go. For one, again, preachers only teach within their own limitations, within the boundaries of their own limitations. And there's nothing that's going to expand understanding and perspective like that kind of a trip. And that passes on to everyone in the church. Also, it's not a vacation. And maybe preachers feel guilty because they feel like they're being asked to take an overseas trip, in London or the Bahamas or something. And that's not what it is at all. It's an educational trip. It's I don't have people get up at 5:30 myself. We maybe 6 or 6:30, but you're already changing time zones. So whatever you're used to here, just reset it for that, and it's not really a big deal. Now we go to bed a little earlier. We get up a little earlier, perhaps. It goes, for some people, it's what they already do here. That's fine, but it's an educational trip, and we're not there to wear anyone out. You want to make good use of your time, but we pace it well, and that's one thing that my trip has as well, is learning to pace these things. If you get too tired, you're not able to absorb things anymore. Your brain gets tired, your body gets tired, you get sick, and we don't want that. So we try to pace it and keep everyone healthy, alert enough, happy, watered. And a lot of the distances over there are very small anyway. So much is close together. We spend time on the bus, but most days the bus stops are 10 minutes apart, 5 to 15 minutes apart, very short distances. Walking, I don't know if we do 4 miles a day on my trip anyway. But some days involve more walking, especially if you're in Jerusalem. You can't just take a bus through Jerusalem, the old city particularly. But we pace it well. If you're a younger preacher or you have a younger preacher, it's, I think, especially beneficial to go at a younger age. Farrell Jenkins has a quote that I'm sure not a lot of us have heard. A trip to Israel is not a crown. That's the idea. Like a lot of preachers preach for 30, 40, 50 years, and then at the end of their career, they go to Israel. I see Phil's holding up the Farrell Jenkins pointer he used to have on his overheads. Yeah, but a lot of preachers go when they're older, and they don't have as many productive years left. It's an educational trip. It's not to cap off your career. It's to help your career and to share with the people you teach. And so there's far more value to go earlier in your career than later. And just for you personally, but also for anyone you teach. If I know it's harder when you're younger because you don't have as much money, you have a younger family, but that's where congregations come in. Encourage your preacher to go, help him to go, help find a way to make it happen. It's continuing education. It's an investment in the career. It's like a graduate course on something that you do every single day that you hopefully will do for many years to come. And the earlier you get those perspectives and resources, the more you and everyone benefits.
Yeah. Well, to say, for me, it's absolutely made me a better student. It's absolutely made me a better teacher of the text, without a doubt. And we talk about a career in an accommodative sense. You can think about it this way: what you're investing in is the spiritual food you're going to have for the next couple of years. It's like sending your preacher to a top culinary school for a couple of weeks, and he comes back, and his meals are better now. And so that means going to worship is going to be better now, and the classes are going to be better now. And we don't do that congregationally in the ways that we could and should. And I think that's one of the things that Terry and I talk about a lot is we want that. We want the preachers who are younger than he and I to be better than we are now. We want them to make those trajectories quicker and stronger and healthier. And this is not like having to send somebody to college for 2 years. You can do these short trips and get great value out of them. That really can change the way someone teaches and preaches. And so there's really good value to it. Luke and I are talking about the possibility of doing a tour together in 2021, I think is what we've talked about. Details are not fully put together for that because he's got his own tour to do right now, and I've got a whole year worth other stuff ahead, but we'll start talking about that in the future too at another time. Before we close off, we've been here for about over an hour, and so it's probably a good time to shut down. Terry, do you have any last comments for us? We'll work around the horn. I'll let Luke have a last comment here in a second.
Well, I just keep thinking about the number of miles you both said that I want Luke to be in charge of whatever tour I go on and not you. That's what I'm learning, Mr. 8 miles a day. No.
Let's go. Let's do the things.
Yeah, let's do all the things in one 24-hour day. No, it's just I really appreciate listening to you guys talk about it, and I think you make a great point about churches helping make this happen for younger guys, and Thanks for doing that. I'll forward this video to my eldership.
You can chop that section out.
Yeah, edit that one little block out. But no, it's been great, and I really appreciate Luke taking the time out of his morning to join us and to have this conversation.
Yeah, Luke, I really appreciate you coming and being here. We were roommates together a long time ago, when we were at Western. And watching your growth in this area has been refreshing. Connecting with you about, Israel has been a benefit to me as a Bible student. And so this is the spot where now you can plug anything you want to plug. You've already plugged your truer. We do this with all of our guests. If you've got something really important you're working on, something that you think is impactful for preachers, for brethren, let us know. What is it? A book, articles? Here you get to go.
I'm not going to plug a book right now. I do have an article series. I'm one of several people who contributes an article, Truth Magazine. It's archaeological. Sometimes the articles are more about geography than archaeology. Short articles, useful. I'll just encourage people once again to, especially if you teach the Bible, to go to find a way to go to Israel, and don't be afraid to ask the congregation you're with to consider it. Don't be afraid to. There are some elements out there that seem to, want to keep preachers in poverty, but I don't think that's most people, at least not these days. And then again, this is not some luxurious thing. It's an educational trip. And the benefit for that preacher or teacher, especially if they're younger, is immense and hard to calculate. It gives understanding. It expands the personal limitations we all have, and it opens a whole new era up. The past 11 years of my life, I've been going once or twice a year. And sometimes, especially if I'm doing a dig that year, I'll go for 3.5 weeks at a time. And just the value to me personally, it's been indescribable, immense. It's given me new resources to share and to read. I notice things in the Bible when I read it I never used to notice. And it opens up new dimensions, new perspectives that the original audience would have seen, but I wouldn't, because I'm 2,000 or more years later on the other side of the world. Find a way to go, ask congregations to help you, and if it helps, I found that people who want to go, if they want to ask for help, commit to some part of any expenses yourself. Find a way, say I can pay this much, and if someone can help me with the rest, I would promise to use into my teaching, use the benefits of my teaching as much as I can. It's not about me. It's about the work here. It's about the understanding we all have of the Bible. And it gets us closer to the original writings, to the original stories, to the original perspectives and understanding. And that's always a good thing.
I think if you frame the goal as improved teaching skills and improved knowledge skills, then having a personal commitment to it really kind of makes it more understandable. It's okay. Like, we're okay with sending out a letter for support because you're going to go preach somewhere. You can kind of think about it in the same way on a conversational level. Look, I'm going to go do this. Let me talk to my elders. Let me see what they have to say to it. They're already going to help anyway. They're going to help because if you're gone, someone's going to teach in your absence. Someone's going to preach in your absence while you're gone that Sunday, those 2 Wednesdays. So in the future, Luke doesn't know this yet, but we're probably going to try to get him to come back on and talk about some of things that are not just about going to Israel, but within his expertise. And so he now knows that, but we'll work with that in the future. Just talking about archaeology, geology, and being a student of the scriptures with an eye towards history. If you're joining us on this broadcast for the first time, thanks for coming. Thanks for listening. If you have individual questions about preaching, about teaching, about this, let us know. If you forward us a question, we'll make sure Luke sees it. And I'll add this, just in the sense of my perspective. I want you to go on these trips. Luke is a great option. There are other great options too. Go. That's the top level thing. Go. But be a good researcher as to who you're going with. Some of the commercial entities that do tours like this, they're not going to provide you the same experience, the same insight, because their goals are different than others. Their goals often are just to make money off of the random person. And talk to brethren who've been before, ask them about their experience, what was good about it, what was hard about it. And yeah, Terry, not every trip has the same amount of walking, but remember, I was also doing Petra in Egypt, and so our trip was a little bit more extensive than an Israel-centric trip. And so, yeah, I might want to go on Luke's trip too, after by comparison. But I did enjoy the adventure of it all. But thanks, everybody. You guys have a great day, and thanks for joining in, Luke. It's great to have you here.
Thank you.